Welcome everyone to Marvel Hub. This is DK Dynamite, and we have yet another person who is claiming to have seen Spider-Man Far From Home early and was kind enough to share a pretty lengthy post over on the Marvel Studios Spoilers Reddit to what we believe is the entire plot for the film itself. But as we always say with any leak, take it all with a grain of salt, because this could be another case like we saw with Avengers Endgame, where somebody hears about a leak online or reads about it in a comment section or a thread and then takes those elements from that leak and then sort of incorporates those elements into his or her own version of what they believe the actual plot of the film will be, and they then add in or sprinkle in some of their own little details that are so unique and so different and so unpredictable to the point where it then spreads as a legitimate leak all over Reddit and all over YouTube. So we've seen that many times before with Endgame and many other Marvel movies, and this could easily be the case right now. But if in the case this is a 100% accurate leak for Far From Home, we'll definitely come back to this Reddit post in a future video after we see the film to sort of talk about each and every one of these plot points again. But starting off here with the first point, the beginning starts with a montage of the dead heroes from the events of Endgame. This is a video that was put together by Peter himself. So that makes perfect sense if they're paying homage to Spider-Man Homecoming, because obviously that movie opened up with a video also made by Peter, which was filling in the gaps from Captain America Civil War and giving us a bit of a behind the scenes look as to what Peter experienced when he was recruited to go to Germany and be on Team Iron Man. So that would be a pretty nice start to this movie and makes perfect sense within Peter's world. But for the next point, we have Mysterio tries to become Peter's new mentor. We already knew that, but it'll be hard to fill Tony Stark's shoes when it comes to Peter's perspective. Mysterio manipulates Peter, uses Tony Stark and Iron Man visions against him. So they could easily use the Iron Man suit in this movie if there is some type of illusion of some sort that Mysterio is doing to manipulate Peter. But in terms of seeing Robert Downey Jr.'s face as Tony Stark, unless they're using archived footage or bonus footage they shot for a different MCU movie, then I'm not sure how they could exactly use Tony Stark. If obviously Robert Downey Jr. hasn't been shooting scenes for this movie, I'm just not sure how that could exactly work for the film itself, unless there is a big surprise or big cameo appearance by Tony at some point later in the movie. But a lot of the writers and directors have already said that that isn't going to be happening and there won't be an appearance by Tony Stark in the movie. So we'll just have to wait and see. But Aunt May sneaks in Peter's blue and red suit in his luggage. We already know that from the several TV spots we saw of Peter at the airport and the woman checking his bag and taking out his classic blue and red Spider-Man suit. So that makes sense. We then have Mysterio's actually from the regular MCU world and was lying about coming from another world. Beck used to work for Stark, stole some tech, and tried to become the new hero in line of Iron Man. So my only problem with that is that Far From Home being an epilogue to Endgame and the end of the Infinity Saga would have made the multiverse storyline work so perfectly, because it ends the Infinity Saga on such a high note with such a good Spider-Man movie and also perfectly paves the way for a lot of future stories that'll be taking place in Phase 4 and beyond, with different timelines, different universes, different characters bleeding over because of the snap and tearing a hole in the dimension. All of that works so perfectly, and the fact that Mysterio even says that he's from Earth 833, which is obviously where Spider-Man UK is from, and the fact that he mentions how the snap allowed him to cross over to our Earth, the fact that all that's already been referenced and said and spoken about, the fact that all that's already out in the open really gets me hyped up for the multiverse in the MCU as a whole. Not just time travel and different timelines, but actual different Earths that we already know about from the official Marvel canon in the comics. The fact that all that's already out there and it might be wasted in this movie really upsets me. Unless they end up saving the multiverse stuff for later down the line, it would be such a shame to know that all of that is getting thrown right down the drain within this movie. But in terms of Mysterio originally being a worker for Tony and then stealing some tech, I guess that could explain how he has his suit and how he got access to some magic and some different things. I guess that makes sense, but at the same time, it would have been cooler to hear that maybe he stole that tech and got his abilities from a different Earth, from that Earth's version of Tony Stark. That would have been great to know about within this movie, but I guess it'll work depending on how they execute it on the big screen. We'll just have to wait and see. But we then have small handful of Peter's classmates and teachers were snapped while the others have aged up 5 years. We already knew that. Peter's introduced to new high tech that belonged to Iron Man with the help from Happy and Fury. There is no Tony Stark AI in Peter's suit or in this high-tech lab. This is where Peter makes the new black and red suit. The stealth suit was provided by Fury and Hill. Peter thinks it is too clunky. So another thing we already talked about before, there was a rumor that apparently Peter would get Tony Stark's voice as his AI for his suit going forward. But again, really goes against the fact that Robert Downey Jr. had officially told himself that he was done with the role of Tony Stark after he shot his last scene for Avengers Endgame. And to kind of throw that statement away and all of a sudden reprise his role in the form of a Jarvis-like role going forward in the MCU, that wouldn't make any sense, especially one movie after Avengers Endgame came out. That's just a slap in the face. But I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I think after Far From Home, they're sort of drawing away from Peter being in Tony's shadow and sort of Peter becoming his own hero and being the Spider-Man we do know from the comics, and is less of a character that relies on a bigger Avenger to sort of teach him how to be a hero, when I think going forward he's going to learn lessons, he's going to make a life for himself and truly be the hero that Tony knew he could be, but without keeping Tony in his shadow, if that makes sense. So I think Spider-Man's really going to become the mainstream hero that we all know and love in the next couple of MCU movies, but will use Tony Stark's legacy as motivation anytime he's getting put down by somebody bigger than him. But for the next point here, we have Mysterio uses projections, drone equipment, and other things to make Molten Man and Hydra Man and the others. So going along with the recent rumor that the Elementals are supposed to be these robots put together by Mysterio to try to make Mysterio look like a hero to the real world, when in reality the Elementals aren't really too real, still cause destruction, but aren't exactly lethal towards Mysterio. They're kind of just there as decoys while Mysterio sort of acts like this new Avenger filling in Tony Stark's shoes apparently. So that could work, and I guess it's okay that they aren't the real Elementals, but I think it's really going to fit well with Mysterio's arc going forward. But we then have Michelle and Peter are officially dating. We all knew that. Ned and MJ destroy some of the drones. This is where the Funko Pop of MJ with the mace comes into play. I could also see that happening perfectly fine. We then have Mysterio dies, and in post-credits he somehow releases an edited video showing that Peter Parker is Spider-Man and was responsible for the attacks. J. Jonah Jameson is back and played yet again by J.K. Simmons. Several people on Twitter have hinted this is what will make people miss the Raimi films. So with Mysterio dying, obviously he's such a magician and is honestly such a big fraud to where he can fool just about anybody. And without a doubt, they wouldn't waste Jake Gyllenhaal's version of Mysterio in just one Spider-Man movie. And with them building up towards Sinister Six, it makes perfect sense to bring him back at some point in the future of the MCU if he does die in this movie, and sort of bring him back with this shocker-like element where all of a sudden you have this big reveal and Mysterio comes out of nowhere and reveals how he faked his death of some sort. But I think it is such a good twist to have him release a video of Peter as Spider-Man, because it doesn't have to be a permanent plot point where the world knows what Spider-Man's identity is and then it's just like that going forward. I don't think they're ready to do that just yet, and I don't think they could ever do that and stay true to Spider-Man's character at the same time. They shouldn't be pulling a Tony Stark where his identity is out in the open, because that definitely worked for Tony's character, but really doesn't work for someone as young as Peter who's still in high school. And I think for the comics that did explore that storyline and narrative where Peter's identity was revealed to everybody, they even knew, the writers themselves even knew that that wasn't working out when staying true to Spider-Man's character. So what they had was Doctor Strange come in and retcon that story and sort of make the world forget about Peter being Spider-Man. So they could easily do that in the films as well, where Peter is exposed for another movie or so, and all of a sudden Doctor Strange comes in, or some other magician or somebody out there in the MCU comes in and sort of wipes the world clean of that memory so that Peter can go back to being undercover as Spider-Man. So they could easily do that. I'm not opposed to it. Not sure if the Sokovia Accords are still in effect after Endgame. Wouldn't be surprised if they still were. But without a doubt, Peter or Spider-Man should be one of the only, if not the only MCU character that keeps the identity a secret going forward. But you guys let me know what you think of that down below. But in terms of J.K. Simmons returning as J. Jonah Jameson, the reason I believe that is because many people who have seen the film have tweeted out things about how the film itself plays perfect homage to hardcore fans who loved the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. And I think the best way to do that is to bring back J.K. Simmons. And we went over that in a previous video as well. I think that works out perfectly, and I would love to see that happen in Spider-Man Far From Home. So I definitely hope that is 100% true. We then have Talos and another Skrull were asked to take Fury and Hill's place on Earth while the real ones are on holiday. This is why Fury gets mad at Peter earlier in the film for mentioning Captain Marvel. So I guess that works, but it's also a slap in the face to know that Fury and Hill didn't exactly take part in whatever the events are in this movie. And it would be a shame to see that, but at the same time, it would be a relief to know that Fury is still in contact with Talos and the Skrulls. But in terms of what that means for a possible secret invasion storyline in the MCU, I honestly believe my original original theory that there are good Skrulls and bad Skrulls, and the bad Skrulls would of course cause Secret Invasion, I believe that would be how they eventually do Secret Invasion, because with the fact that Fury's still in contact with Skrulls just means that whatever happens in the future, we'll have the Skrulls by our side, and I think Captain Marvel's also in support of that. So with that being said, I guess it's just another point in the MCU, or another point for the end of the Infinity Saga that proves that the Skrulls are still relevant and will be relevant for any future Marvel project that involves Nick Fury or Captain Marvel. We'll just have to wait and see. But we don't see any aftermath of Peter's identity getting revealed, as it cuts out just like how May's reaction in the first film's post-credit scene was. So another cliffhanger, probably leading into Spider-Man 3, which I believe will release in 2021. If Sony stays on schedule with their Spider-Man releases, they'll want to release an MCU Spider-Man movie every 2 years. So we'll probably see another Spider-Man movie in Phase 4 that could easily be announced later this summer when they reveal their Phase 4 slate to the world. We then have there's no Chameleon, Osborn, Pepper Potts, Barf, no Morgan, and there's no Vulture, Scorpion, or Hints at any other of Spider's rogue gallery. So if that's the case, I'm not too disappointed about no Sinister Six reveal, because I feel like what they're doing right now is really establishing all of these core villains that Spider-Man has that are also in the Sinister Six and just happen to be. They're setting all that up just as well as they set up all the heroes from Phase 1. They're setting all that up so that at some point when they do cast Norman Osborn and they bring all those people together to be the Sinister Six, it feels so meaningful and feels like it really paid off after jumping into Spider-Man's arc in Captain America Civil War and seeing how far it got within Phase 4, Phase 5, whenever they do introduce the Sinister Six to everybody. So I feel like they really want to get us attached to all these characters first before jumping into all that Sinister Six and major villain plot stuff. And I agree with that. And I also agree with this because many videos ago I went over the fact that if Norman Osborn isn't casted and they have this stand-in cameo during the post-credit scene that is implied to be Norman, it sort of takes the weight away from who the next big bad could be. Because if they cast Norman Osborn and put out this big scene of him putting together Sinister Six, and you could see the face of who this Norman Osborn is, it makes so much more sense and feels like it has so much more weight for the MCU going forward. So instead of rushing that and having a stand-in cameo being implied as Norman, they could just save all that for maybe Spider-Man 3 or 4, where you then have the real Norman Osborn, who's officially casted, coming in to, let's say, the new Avengers Tower that is now Oscorp Tower, and then sits at our long table with all these villains that we've been getting introduced to within some previous Spider-Man movies, from Homecoming, Far From Home, Spider-Man 3. That's how I see them doing it, and I have no problem waiting another film or more to actually get a scene like that at the possible Oscorp Tower. So I guess we don't get an answer as to who bought Avengers Tower yet. They're definitely saving that for a future project, and I have no issue with that whatsoever, but I also have no issue not seeing Morgan, Pepper, or Barf. Once again, this is a Spider-Man movie, yes, in the MCU, but it's not going to rely heavily on every other character that we assumed would be revealed or assumed would have a cameo in this movie. But that's about it. Leave all your thoughts down below in the comment section. Once again, take this all with a grain of salt. If this is 100% true, then we'll make a follow-up video after we see the movie and go back to this post and talk about how crazy it was that every one of the major plot points was already leaked a couple of weeks prior to release. But that's about it. This has been DK Dynamite. Check all links down below in the description and turn notifications on to stay up to date with latest and greatest Marvel news and information. And peace out, everyone.